Mekkah, can you believe that this is the final chapter of my Fire Emblem 5 Paragon Mode 0% Girls playthrough? I cannot believe it.
Get hype.
So, in this final chapter, we're obviously going to be defeating the final boss, and in this game, it's just a dude. Granted, it's the dude that stoned Eyvel, but he's not a dragon, he's not like a thing that looks like a dragon, he's not a guy riding a dragon or possessed by a dragon, he's just a regular dude. So he's really not that difficult to defeat. In fact, he's kind of notorious for being one of the worst bosses in the entire franchise. But what's the actual difficult part about this chapter is getting to him. So, you might have gotten a glimpse of the map layout. There are 6 different rooms, and in each room, the objective is to dispatch a mini-boss standing on top of the center circle. You don't see them quite yet, they don't appear until after the chapter starts. We have to dispatch that boss and then occupy that tile with one of our units. So, the very first thing that we do is, in Leaf starting group, there is a mini-boss that looks like Raedric. In fact, he's almost identical to Raedric. The only difference is that he has a Wrath skill, so that makes things a bit trickier. And it makes things very dangerous for Dermott, because if he gets hit, then he dies. But fortunately, the Blagi Sword has a Miracle skill, so the first thing that we want to do is to kill him, because that gets rid of 4 leadership stars for the enemy team. And then the very next thing that we want to do is we switch over to Asvel, and Asvel is going to use his Blizzard Tome to put one of the mini-bosses to sleep. This mini-boss has very high magic and also has a Berserk Staff, so we want to disable her as soon as possible. And his hit rate on her isn't so great, because even though she's being weighed down by a very heavy tome, because there are 5 other leadership stars provided by the final boss of this map, his hit rate's only like 43%. So those are the 2 least likely things to happen, and we do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, so the story of the rest of the chapter is that you're fighting the Dark Warlords. There is a total of 12 of them in the story, but there's only 6 in this chapter for some reason, and they have weird German numerics. And they are pretty powerful. In fact, they are so strong that a lot of our units just get 1 round KO'd, so our best way to take care of them is putting them to sleep. Now, Elf we had to do with Blizzard, because their magic is so high, and they're all standing on magic floors. But the rest of them, their magic is pretty low, so we can use our Brazilian sleep staffs to take care of them and reduce their stats to 0. This trivializes each of the rooms pretty handily, because whereas before you only have 3 units for each room, right? And then you have to open a door, kill the Dark Mage because he has Hell, and then you have 1 unit left over to take care of the very strong boss that's in there, and usually they can't even do that. You can't even do that with 3 units, but if they're asleep, then the only threat left is these Armor Knights that are in those rooms, and they are usually not big of a threat. Like, some of them have master weapons, but others have poison weapons, so they're kind of a joke.
So the biggest challenge going into this chapter does not really even involve planning the chapter itself, but rather it involves planning who goes where, because as Mekkah said, the bosses are kind of variable in quality. There's certain units that do better against certain bosses, and not only that, but the composition of the Armor Knights actually determines who should go where. Because you can imagine that someone like Xavier or someone like Ced is better equipped to deal with the heavy-hitting master weapon using Armor Knights. So we have Xavier deployed in the cell where the Master Bow Armor Knights are, and then we have Ced deployed in the cell where the Master Lance Armor Knights are. But on the other hand, the cell that Merida is trying to get to, those Armor Knights only have poison bows, so they don't even one-shot her. And at base, with her special weapon and her Pursuit Critical, she's actually potent enough to 1-round KO an enemy Dark Mage. So that's pretty nice. And in addition to that, she's giving plus 20 support bonus to Galzus, who really appreciates it because his hit rate against Zwolf is not that great, but he has like a zillion skills to work with, so it still works out pretty well.
So each of these bosses is supposed to be modeled after a character that you're already familiar with. We mentioned Ainz, who is modeled after Raedric, who we actually killed in chapter 24. The others are all characters that you have recruited or could have recruited. So the rogue boss, his name is, as Donan said, is Zwolf, and he's modeled after Lifis, not Parn, even though Parn is infinitely more badass. The sniper in the room that Dagdar is currently attacking and failing to KO an Armor Knight in is modeled after Eyvel, who, spoilers, is supposed to be Bridget from
No! Mekkah!
They are the same character, and Eyvel is actually going to kill herself, more spoilers, so there's that. The warrior in the lower right is none other than Dagdar, of course, and The hero in the top room in the middle is modeled after Galzus, and an elf, the annoying berserk sage, is modeled after Sara. And fun fact is, if you don't recruit the characters that these Dark Warlords are modeled after, then they actually keep their portraits as those characters, which is too spooky for me.
They actually have like slightly differently pitched portraits, right? It's kind of like how the morphs in FE7, they're like paler versions of their original selves.
Yeah, they are. I think the morphs in FE7 actually references to this chapter. This whole chapter resembles the FE7 final chapter, I think.
Yeah, with the 6 rooms and the like center room not being revealed until after you kill everyone. But the final chapter of FE7, you don't have to occupy a tile, so it's a little easier than that.
It is, but I guess in general FE7 is just easier than this game. I think actually one of the most annoying things about this chapter is you have to open the doors. I think that is a major bullshit thing, is if you didn't buy enough door keys beforehand, then you have to steal door keys from the dark mages inside the rooms or something to get in, or you have to use lockpicks and get your frail thieves all over the place while getting attacked by strong enemies and reinforcements. So yeah, buy door keys, kids. They're good for you.
I think that for noobs to this game, this is like one of the times when they realize, like, shit, I can't win the game, because stealing door keys from the dark mages inside the doors is very hard when you can't open any door to begin with. And not only that, but the dark mages have Fenrir tomes that have 5 uses each. So, like, even if their AI were set to open the doors by themselves, they have a 10 range attack that they can just, like, fire at anyone. So, I mean, it's like once you get to here without any door keys, you're pretty much up a creek without a paddle. So, one of the easy ways to take care of some of these sleeping bosses is to just capture them. And that's really what we want to do with both Elf in the top right and Foom from the bottom left, because both of them have miracle skill, so if you try to kill them, even though all their stats except for luck are 0, because their luck is not 0, then they have a pretty high chance of just activating Miracle. And once Miracle activates, it stays in effect for the rest of the round combat, so even if you attack someone like 15 times, you will miss them 15 times if Miracle activates.
Miracle OP. So Asvel is killing the Galzus clone with his last Grafcalibur use, actually. Thankfully, he does not have to interrupt his combat because the tome broke mid-battle, because of the mechanic we explained in chapter 14. Your tomes don't break mid-battle, you get to continue. Asvel actually had pretty shitty hit rate on him, even with his high accuracy Grafcalibur. Why is that?
It's because Veld has the 5 leadership stars and he's hidden from view, so you can't do anything about that. And Zwei, the Galzus clone, is standing on a tile that gives plus 20 avoid, and he has pretty high base luck as well. So that all that combines to give Asvel not perfect hit rate. And additionally, speaking of non-perfect hit rates, because Dagdar missed earlier, we don't have the option to capture Foomf anymore because he's occupying his turn, getting rid of one of the armor knights. So the backup plan is to have Eyvel kill herself, which is a little less reliable because of the risk of Miracle, but it's our only option available at that point. I didn't want to reset. We came too far for that.
We did come really far. Actually, we're warping Ced over to kill Veld. He has a magic up boost, so he actually has enough power to 1-round KO this final boss. Veld is equipped with a 3 to 10 range stone tome, the one that he used to stone Eyvel, and for some reason it now works from afar instead of up close. Ced is so powerful that he just gets rid of the final boss with one blow, and I'm going to guess we're not going to walk Leaf over.
You would be correct in that. We are going to warp him over, and we're going to do it using somebody who does not miss, thankfully. So, I have forgotten to turn on the battle animation for the final boss battle. Veld has a really cool boss theme, but if you want to see Ced killing a Dark Bishop, you can go to chapter 23, and he does that pretty well there. So, Leaf ends up seizing the throne in 3 turns, and we are done with this playthrough. Can you believe it, Mekkah? Because in 2016, a lot of things happened. David Bowie died, Donald Trump got elected president, and I finished this playthrough.
Yeah, it was a very moving year, but this was probably one of the better things that happened this year.
Probably.
Rest in peace, Alan Rickman.
I like to point out that I get the impression that all of the events of this game happened within the span of the year 776. which means that it took Leaf about as long to do this entire campaign as it did for me to upload this playthrough.
Yeah, I can't believe it's over, but it actually is. Well, not quite. We still have the customary Q&A to go through while you watch Don's amazing turn counts, as well as the unit records. A small note on those, he doesn't record losses per se. The losses you see in records are actually captures. So, for example, Leaf is listed as 2 losses, but that's just because he got captured twice. So keep that in mind. So for the first question, these are all from Reddit, by the way. Shrouded in Myth asks, you stated a controversial opinion that players who complain about frustrating gameplay are simply incompetent, and FE is very rarely hard for a bullshit reason. Now, FE5 is often called out for fake difficulty and frustrating gameplay. So are there any examples, in your opinion, of genuine fake difficulty and frustrating gameplay in this game? And I think the first thing that comes to mind when I read this question was Chapter 4X, the turn 1 enemy phase, where Fergus has to survive a bunch of enemy armor knights and kill them all with a rapier. I mean, Fergus is awesome, but he did have a chance to die.
So the first thing that comes to mind would be all the formation shenanigans that are involved, because I think that when you play a strategy game, you don't expect there to be a formation mechanic that involves having to open a spreadsheet and then plan out your formation using like 30 minutes of mental manipulation to figure out like who's going to be where for the next several chapters. I don't think people play Fire Emblem for that sort of thing. It does add that aspect to the game, which is certainly interesting, but it's not something I want to do more than a few times. Other aspect of frustrating gameplay I can think of is just the fact that if you don't have enough door keys, you can get locked out of being able to complete the game. I like that you're rewarded for being prepared with door keys, but I think the punishment for not having them is a little too steep. And this really could have just been resolved by having the ability for enemies to drop items upon being killed, like in FE7. For some reason, they had this in like FE4, and I'm pretty sure they had it in FE3 as well. And then FE5 and FE6 didn't have it, and then now it's a series staple. So if enemies drop door keys when they got beaten, like in the final chapter, then it really wouldn't be so bad if you went in with 0.
Yeah. Next question, Falcoma asks, outside of Ced's recruitment in Chapter 24, or Chapter 23 actually, and movement growth, are there any other places you think you could save a turn with growth? And for me, I think that would be Leaf with growth, has been mentioned to save a couple turns, right?
Correct. So in Chapter 4X, if you plow a bunch of stat boosters into him beforehand, and then maybe give him some extra level ups, manipulate some of his levels a little bit, he should be able to just run his way through that chapter without a problem. Chapter 6, Asvel can do the same thing with some growth under his belt. You can save a turn by going through the center of the map instead of doing the circuitous pacifist route that I took. And then in Chapter 8X, you can have Leaf and Asvel, one of them carry the other, warp them, and then kill the boss and seize in 2 turns. Doing that, you would ignore the Wrath manual and also the leg ring, but the leg ring doesn't save as many turns as the warp skip saves. Now doing that leaves you with 1 less warp in Chapter 10, but you can just have Leaf and Asvel buddy up again, and then do the same thing there. So it depends on whether or not, like, they just have to not have the same amount of build as each other, which is pretty consistent, I think. And that leads us to the next question.
Yeah, were there any case where a strat would be actually ruined by growth rates? Like, for example, I could see Dean, and this is from the question, doubling Xavier's lieutenants would be a good example, but is there anything else? And yeah, the answer to that is probably build growth. Like, if certain people grow too much build, then they either can't get rescued, or they can't rescue someone else, or they get movement penalties, so that would kind of suck. Any other examples you can think of?
Yeah, so by the way, Headshot Fox 713 asked this question. So I remember there was this one playthrough, I forget whether it was a triple S-Wing playthrough or a speed run, but the Chapter 12X strategy involved Ronan carrying Saphy, just like I did, except in that run, Saphy had gotten a 2% build growth at some earlier point in the game, and then Ronan couldn't carry her anymore without getting a movement penalty. So that was pretty funny, but it's just one of many examples about why build growths are not good for the game. This is directed to all the people out there who are like, "Oh, Fire Emblem should have Constitution growths again." This is why I don't think it should have Constitution growths. I don't think Fire Emblem needs any more randomness than it already has. Beyond that, so Headshot Fox asked if Dean having too many stats and doubling Xavier's lieutenants is example. he would need a lot of stats to do that because the Sleep Sword weighs 20, and Dean's base speed is not that high when he's dismounted, and his build is kind of average at a 12. So he would need to combine 4 points to even have a chance at really doubling a lot of them, and he didn't fight a lot until that point. But I see what the point is there.
Yeah. The only other thing is, like, if people have too much defense or magic and they end up not getting attacked by certain enemies. Like, I remember Asvel was having quote-unquote trouble getting attacked by some mages because his pure water had, like, if it hadn't run out as far as it did, then it wouldn't have gotten attacked. But it's, like, really rare, and generally having more stats is better. So, the one with a long name asks, how was your first experience with the game? Now, I'll tell you about my first experience. It was pretty funny. I thought, well, this is FE5, and this is supposed to be really hard. So I better arena abuse really hard with all my scrolls. So I arena abused my ass off in chapter 7, and then at the end I had a Karen with 1 million strength and build so quickly. And I remember one particular instance in chapter 23, I actually ended up missing out Ced on my first run of the chapter because I just flew Karen to the boss and killed him in 1 round with like a Master Lance. And I also played the game with guides, so it wasn't really like blind or anything. It was still really enjoyable, but it wasn't as hard as it could have been. What about you?
I don't remember a whole lot because it was very long ago that I played this the first time, but I don't like playing games blind, so I definitely used the guide. And the one thing I do remember is that every time I leveled up, I made sure that the unit had at least 6 scrolls in his inventory, if not 7, if they were like getting attacked when leveling up. Because I'm sure I've already said this elsewhere before, but when you give me growth, I'm a stat whore.
Okay, Ruda. User Twango asks, did planning this LTC change your opinion on any of FE5's maps or units? And I'm particularly curious if you still view 24X as one of the hardest chapters in the series to plan for, as you stated so in your FE6 Q&A. So for me, when I first played FE5, I thought Dagdar was kind of like bad-ish. And then when I started reviewing FE5 units for some thread on Serenus Force, I was like, that's actually pretty okay. I'll give him a 7 out of 10, because he can double quite a bit, actually. And then I saw Donon's playthrough, and I was like, wait, Dagdar's really good. Let me give this guy a 9 out of 10, because he did miss 1 armor knight.
Yeah, that 1 armor knight in the final chapter cost him that 1 point. I had done this playthrough once before, actually. I just didn't record it. So I'm already familiar with all of FE5's units and how they can be used in this context. So obviously this playthrough didn't change my opinions. And as far as the question about 24X, the strategy that I use for 24X is more or less the same as the one that I used before. So again, it's a little hard to assess the difficulty of a strategy when you're already familiar with it, so you don't really have to come up with anything new about it. But there is one aspect of planning for Chapter 24X that's really difficult, and that is that like the starting positions are not very flexible. For example, you have to have certain considerations such as like Tina can't start on the same side as Leaf, or Dermott has to start on the same side as Leaf, or you have to have like certain units starting at certain places, otherwise like you have to warp someone, but then other stuff has to happen. So it's hard to appreciate without someone explaining it to you or without you doing it yourself. So that's still one of the harder parts of the chapter.
Alright, we got that resolved. Sabin Suplexington asks, how would the B route have affected your strats besides the obvious lack of Ilios and Sleuth and the need to recruit Olwen? And would Connemore do anything? I don't think Connemore would really do anything per se. We don't really need more combat units, I think. I think the bigger miss would be, instead of having Connemore, would be not having Imelda and her staff use. So she ended up doing quite a bit of sleep staffing late in the game, and that would have to be relocated, and we already pretty tight on staff uses to begin with. And I reckon Chapter 16B would be a pain to plan because you have to escape and you have to bring a minimum of 8 units, but you only have 3 flyers. And you also get 1 less warp and rescue staff, so that is a big pain. And I guess there's more problems, right?
Also, rip Sleuth, you don't get Sleuth. He's pretty important too. So it's really hard to say what you would do differently because there are some pretty big changes. Having fewer transporting staffs definitely has a big impact. And not having Imelda and Sleuth do all the things they did in the final chapters is also pretty hard to cope with. So I don't know what I have to change. It would obviously end up taking more turns, but I finished this run with a 14 turn buffer, So I think it's definitely still very possible.
Yeah, I think Falcoma has done some kind of FE5 draft where he went B route and he's still like, if he didn't SSS rank, then at least he got a very low turn count. Lilio asks, has there ever been a time when you were stuck on figuring out a reliable strategy and then someone suggested something completely ridiculous that ended up working? Because I'm always curious to see if other people experience that sort of tunnel vision, because I know I do.
This is probably the last question that we have time for. So I don't ask anybody for Fire Emblem advice ever, because I'm so good at the game that their advice would make me worse. I was just kidding, if you can't tell. But generally speaking, I don't ask people for advice because I don't have to bother them, and usually they don't have a 0% gross copy of the game on hand to work with. So those are the two big reasons. I'm not averse to looking at other playthroughs and getting ideas from there, however. And as far as your tunnel vision question goes, when I was planning out FE12, originally I was fixated on forging a Thoron tome for Wendell for this one chapter, because he has to go Bishop and can't use Excalibur. And then when I came back to planning FE12 a week ago, I was like, wait, I could just buy an arm scroll and give it to Wendell and he could use Excalibur and I don't have to forge a Thoron. So that's one example of, coming back to the game after a long period of time, refreshing your point of view. So, thanks for all your questions, thanks for your viewership, it was a blast, and I hope you stay tuned for FE12 coming up next.
See ya.